Hi there, guys and girls. This is Honors Biology, Energy and Photosynthesis lecture video number 3. I'm going to start lecture video number 3 by talking about the photosynthesis review. I'm going to go back a slide and then talk specifically about Calvin cycle today. So our previous lecture video number 2 focused on the light reactions and quite a bit of detail on light reactions. Once again, I'm going to tell you guys to watch these videos multiple times. You need to watch them for these ideas and these concepts to become familiar to you. All right, so let's review. Photosynthesis has two parts: light reactions, Calvin cycle. Light reactions. This is the part of photosynthesis that absorbs light, that utilizes water, creates oxygen gas, and produces ATP and NADPH, which are the hydrogens and the electrons that are needed in the Calvin cycle. So these are the two main products of the light reactions that are needed in the Calvin cycle. In the Calvin cycle, carbon dioxide, the term we're going to start using is fixed, which means it gets converted into something. So carbon dioxide is not organic. When it gets fixed, it gets converted into something that's organic, and eventually it becomes sugar, glucose in this case. At the end of the Calvin cycle, we'll talk about how a lot of the sugar isn't used immediately for respiration and energy. A lot of it is stored as starch, and some of it gets used into building more cell walls. So we are going to be focusing on the Calvin cycle, this section here on today's lecture. So the Calvin cycle, part 2. Well, where does it take place? Well, part 1, called the light reactions, happens in these thylakoids, and specifically in the membrane of these thylakoids. Okay, that's part 1, the light reactions. Part 2, called the Calvin cycle, takes place outside of those thylakoids in the stroma, the liquidy part of the chloroplast. Okay, term I already mentioned, carbon fixation. This is a term in which carbon dioxide in the air, and carbon dioxide in the air is not organic. Carbon dioxide in the air is not organic, and it is bonded and converted into something that is organic. All right, so where does part 2 take place? In the stroma of the chloroplast. Part 1, the light reactions, takes place in the thylakoid, specifically in the membrane of the thylakoid. And once again, Calvin cycle, just like the light reactions, they're enzyme-assisted reactions. These enzymes are involved in doing this process. Okay, so let's talk about Calvin cycle. First step is called carbon fixation. So this is carbon in the air. This carbon in the air can float through these little tiny pores in plant leaves called stomata, and carbon dioxide can enter the plant, okay, right into that area. Carbon dioxide is hydrophobic and nonpolar, therefore it can move right through those membranes into the area that it needs to go into. So step 1, called carbon fixation, it takes carbon from the air, carbon dioxide from the air, combines with this chemical called ribulose bisphosphate, RUBP is what I'm going to call it. So RUBP, along with the help of an enzyme called Rubisco, okay, this is one of the most abundant, it is the most abundant enzyme on the planet. So RUBP, along with the help of an enzyme called Rubisco, can fix, all right, carbon dioxide, or turn carbon dioxide into something that is organic in this case. All right, so the first molecule, so RUBP has 5 carbons. RUBP picks up carbon dioxide. It now has 6 carbons, and then it gets halved. It gets cut in half. And those new molecules have 3 carbons. So these are called C3 plants because the first major product, called 3-PGA, has only 3 carbons in it. So once again, RUBP has 5 carbons. It picks up a carbon dioxide through carbon fixation with the help of Rubisco. Now that 6 carbon molecule gets chopped in half, forming 3 carbon molecules called 3-PGA. So this is they're called C3 plants, or you can call it a C3 pathway. A 3 carbon pathway is what it's called. So 3-PGA, 3 carbons. That's the main product of step 1, called carbon fixation. Step 2, called the reduction phase. So let's do a quick review. Back in our other chapter, oxidation and reduction. Okay, oxidation is when an electron is lost. So we're going to be talking about hydrogens being lost. Reduction is when hydrogens are gained or electrons are gained. So step 2, 3-PGA is going to be reduced, which means it is going to gain electrons or gain hydrogens. Where did the hydrogens come from that it gets to gain? They are being carried by NADPH. So in the step or the phase called reduction of 3-PGA, 3-PGA gets reduced, therefore it is going to gain hydrogens. Those hydrogens that it gains came from NADPH. NADPH donates the hydrogens and it gets converted into NADP+. So NADPH, it lost hydrogens to become NADP+. So NADPH is oxidized. 3-PGA is reduced. They go together. In order to do this step, some energy is required. So ATP goes in, and ATP, when it's used, a phosphate is broken off, and ADP forms as a result of that. ADP and NADP plus can be recycled back to the light reactions and used in the light reactions again. So when this happens, step 2, ATP breaks down hydrolysis and ADP forms. This ADP gets recycled back, and I'll show you a picture at the end. NADPH gets oxidized. It loses the hydrogen and becomes NADP+. 3-PGA becomes G3P, and G3-PGA gets reduced, so it picks up hydrogens and becomes this molecule or this compound called G3P. G3P is pretty much the main molecule or the main compound made in this process. G3P can be converted into organic compounds. Pick them: glucose, sugar, lipids, fatty acids, proteins, amino acids. So G3P is really one of the main products of the Calvin cycle. And G3P gets converted into, for example, glucose. Okay, most of the G3P does not get converted into glucose. Most of it needs to continue the cycle, and most of the G3P gets converted back into RUBP, and that's step 3. And let's go to the next one. All right, step 3 is the regeneration of the starting molecule called RUBP. That's the starting molecule that starts this whole process. So the plant cell needs to ensure that it has enough RUBP to continue the Calvin cycle. So most of the G3P that's produced after step 2 gets converted into RUBP. That requires energy, so ATP goes in, and it gets hydrolyzed or broken down, and ADP comes out. This ADP, along with this ADP, can get recycled back and used in the light reactions. Now we have RUBP formed, starting the process over again. Okay, so here's the Calvin cycle. Let's put it all together. Step 1, carbon fixation. RUBP, all right, it's already inside of the plant. It's inside of the cell. Where does it come from? It's already there. 5-carbon molecule, with the help of Rubisco, the enzyme, fixes or picks up carbon dioxide and forms a 6-carbon molecule that gets halved and forming 3-carbon molecules called 3-PGA. First step of carbon fixation, all right, the Calvin cycle. Now 3-PGA gets reduced, and it gets converted as it's reduced into G3P. How does that happen? It happens with the help of energy, ATP, getting hydrolyzed and broken down, forming ADP. Hydrogens are needed because since 3-PGA gets reduced, it is gaining hydrogens, and they come from NADPH, donating those hydrogens to the step. NADPH gets oxidized. It loses its hydrogens and becomes NADP+. This gets oxidized, NADPH is oxidized, 3-PGA is reduced and forming G3P. G3P, one of the main compounds, the main compound of the Calvin cycle. G3P gets turned into glucose, sugar, fatty acids, amino acids, any organic compounds that it needs to produce. Most of the G3P gets regenerated into RUBP, and that's step 3, so that the process can continue and it doesn't stop. Step 3 requires ATP also, and it hydrolyzes ATP, forming adenosine diphosphate. All right, and this ADP and that ADP can go back to the light reactions, and ADP plus can also be recycled and used in the light reactions. And this is showing you what I meant by recycling. So this is the light reactions. This is the Calvin cycle. This is happening inside of the thylakoid in the membrane. This is happening in the stroma, the liquid part of the chloroplast. So this is the chloroplast. Part 1, the light reactions produce the main products that are needed are ATP and NADPH. They make their way to the Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle, showing it to you right here, uses the ATP and NADPH, and it recycles back ADP and NADP plus back to the light reaction. So that process can continue on also. What is produced during the light reactions? A little oxygen gas also. But the main products of the light reactions are ATP and NADPH because they are needed in the Calvin cycle. In the Calvin cycle, carbon dioxide comes in. That comes in from the air, and the main product G3P gets converted into carbohydrates, glucose, you name it, anything organic. All right, and it's showing you the link between the two processes here. I'm going to stop there.